Hallo.
Geht's Ihnen?
Ja.
Alles gut?
Wie geht's Ihnen? Ja, ein bisschen ausgewogen. So, well, we have a very exciting panel with excellent guests, and I'm really looking forward to the debate. But we will start with a keynote address by our host, the Foreign Minister of North Macedonia. Please.
Thank you so much. Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear guests. At the outset, allow me to express my appreciation for your attendance here today. It is truly a privilege to have such esteemed panelists on this year's PRESPA Forum Dialogue, as well as to host my dear colleagues at this session with the aim to exchange ideas on how to build resilient European security together. As the first edition of PRESPA Forum Dialogue ended last year, we expected that the key topic of this year's would be the economic, social, and cultural advancement of the Western Balkans, in the spirit of its full convergence with the latest European trends. Certainly, that was the impression that we all shared a year ago here in Ohrid, acknowledging the role of the Western Balkans as an inseparable part of the future of Europe. Unfortunately, our discussion today takes place at a critical moment for the rules-based international order and for the peace and security in Europe. Today, a year later, unfortunately, none of us has a dilemma that rebuilding our common security is the most pressing issue to which we must find the right solution. The bloody Russian aggression against a sovereign and independent state, Ukraine, should be a reflection point for all of us belonging to the democratic bloc, as it will have a profound effect on the future security architecture of the European continent. Let's have no doubt in this. Russian aggression in Ukraine also poses a direct threat, an immense geopolitical challenge towards the whole of Europe too. That's why we should all together find the courage to strategically rethink Europe's future in today's security environment. We are posed with two dilemmas. One school of thought calls for the need for an immediate ceasefire, fearing that unless there's a halt in fighting, the war might escalate to a point where Russian president will resort to chemical or nuclear weapons, so-called don't poke the bear mentality. The other school of thought calls for the West to provide all-out military and economic support to Ukraine with a potential for a transformative geopolitical reconfiguration in the European continent, one that would rest on the NATO's Baltic to Black Sea intermarium corridor of countries closely aligned with the EU and the US. In this regard, the defense of Ukraine is not only about national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Historically, the two fundamental principles of democratic governance, but ultimately about defending Europe from interference and imperial drive by third actors and ultimate dissolution. Preserving the independence of Ukraine, hence, is not only fundamental to Ukrainians, but to every other European as well. At a geostrategic level, the emergence of a free, independent, successful, and European Ukraine aligned with the West, for which aspirations it has our support, would also help security consolidation of the Europe as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to redirect you now to the Western Balkans' future and its performance within the European political and security architecture. First, I would like to stress once again the key message from last year's forum, which is the Western Balkans is geographically, politically, and culturally part of Europe, and hence there is no doubt that its future is in the European and Euro-Atlantic alliances. Just a brief glance at the map clearly shows that this region is not on the periphery, but in the heart of Europe, surrounded by member states of the Union. This region borders only with the EU, and hence when it comes to the integration of the Western Balkans into the EU, the right term would be to complete the European Union and not to enlarge it. And this is not only a political, but also a geostrategic statement. Located in the southeastern part of Europe, the Western Balkans represent the southeast gate of Europe in every possible way. When it comes to energy diversification, one must inevitably think of the southeastern energy connection corridors. When we talk about the challenges of migration, the Balkan routes of movement are inevitably on the agenda. When we think about connecting with Central Asia, with Africa, the only route passes through this region. Therefore, a stable, prosperous, and integrated Western Balkans is a geopolitical investment for a secure, stable, and prosperous continent. Now, it is clearer than ever. EU enlargement with the Western Balkans can be seen as a strong investment in the European security and commanding the strong strategic importance and logic of keeping Western Balkans closer to EU. Western Balkan leaders meeting with EU 27 heads of states and governments that will take place in Brussels on 23rd of June provides another opportunity to discuss how to jointly deal with geopolitical challenges posed by Russia's aggression and to envisage this more strategic and proactive approach. EU will soon have to take decisions. Clear, unambiguous positions are needed for clear perspective. Western Balkan stability depends on that. If same messages as in last years are repeated, it will be a wrong and detrimental signal. Western Balkans as the closest region is of crucial importance for Europe, and its credibility is at stake in the wake of the dramatic events unfolding in Ukraine. Therefore, I believe EU is at a crossroad. If it leaves Western Balkans out now, it will be the EU itself to lose more. Strong signal for the region is needed now. However, it is not only EU, but also the strong transatlantic bond that is a bedrock of Europe's security. NATO is the only place that brings North America and Europe together every day to discuss common security challenges and to preserve peace. As the newest member state of the alliance, North Macedonia, together with Albania and Montenegro, create the so-called Balkan trio of countries that are members of NATO and stand firmly in defense of the transatlantic connections of the entire region. We are strategic partners with the United States. Most recently, the first country in the region to launch a strategic dialogue, being at the same time a credible partner of the European Union. We followed suit and joined all the EU sanctions, and we shouldn't be alone mitigating the consequences of being 100% committed and aligned with common foreign and security policies. Further to this, let me remind you that North Macedonia, even in the pre-accession process, before the start of the negotiations, has an impressive over 40% transposition of the EU acquis. Western Balkans is part of Europe, and even putting aside the current security challenges, a secure and stable continent means a united continent with Western Balkans as a part of the EU and NATO. The region has evolved in the last decades and now is more oriented towards building bridges, but also has become an important player of the international community. In this regard, I would mention our upcoming OSCE chairpersonship in 2023, an important forum with participating states from Vancouver to Vladivostok. As we were preparing our priorities and finding ways how to leave a positive footprint on the organization, the Russian invasion imposed on us to have different scenarios for our engagement next year. As the chances of having a regular chairmanship become less likely, we are developing scenarios from crisis/active war or to crisis/post-conflict management. We will have to constantly adapt our priorities and agenda in accordance with the developments on the field. Today's geopolitical realities require vigilance and appropriate geostrategic thinking followed by straightforward actions. Let us not spare a moment more on missed opportunities. As never before, the voice of reason must arise, and finally, we should hear, "Welcome home, fellow Europeans." It is a great pleasure to have you all take part in the second edition of the Prespa Forum Dialogue. With your presence here today, I could freely say that we are proving worthy of your precious attention, and I welcome your valuable contributions and discussions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister Osmani, for hosting us, for giving this opportunity for this timely debate. My name is Gerald Knaus, and I want to thank you for being able to host this debate on security in Europe, resilient or otherwise, because as we all know, at the moment, security is threatened. 22 years ago, in November 1990, states of Europe, the US, Canada, and then the Soviet Union met in Paris and agreed on the Charter for a New Europe, which created a secretariat in Vienna. The Secretary General is here with us today, but which created also a vision of what the German philosopher Kant called perpetual peace, ewige Friede, of republics, today we would say democracies, in a federation based on democracy, human rights, and the security of every state. Now, since that vision, in the autumn of 1990, there have been 20 wars or serious armed conflicts in Europe. But only one, and that ended with a peace agreement in 1998, the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, only one in the European Union. So Europe has been divided for decades, with one part of the continent suffering from the most severe insecurity, with wars in Eastern Europe erupting almost every year. And the question is how that transformation that has built the Europe of the Charter of Paris, the new Europe of Kantian perpetual peace, in half the continent can be extended to the other half. And the tool to do that, we have learned, has been integration. The integration of democracies around common values to support each other, to defend each other, and to strengthen this bond. Now, the institution that is at the heart of this, the OSCE, is facing this head-on, and we are very happy that we have another special address by the General Secretary of the OSCE, Helga Schmidt, to give us an outlook of, from this perspective, how can we preserve the values of that great promise of 1990?
Should I stay here? Yeah. No, thank you. And indeed, in 1990, I think was a short moment of broad consensus, which did not last for too long. But I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to explain what we do with this organization and the institutions on a daily basis to build resilient security. But let me first of all warmly thank our hosts for their great hospitality and this wonderful forum. It's great to be here. You were referring to the task of this organization. Indeed, this organization was founded to make us work together, to cooperate across the three dimensions. That's the trademark of the OSCE. It's political, military, it's environment, economic security, and the very important human dimension, human rights and fundamental freedoms. And this organization was also founded to reduce the likelihood of conflict. And this is what we do on a daily basis. And yes, there have been conflicts, unfortunately, but we have also managed, also through our participation in many conflict formats, to the daily work we do to prevent many conflicts. And yet, here I am, and we are faced with the grave reality of war. And this is unprecedented. I would not want to compare this with anything else, because this is a completely unprovoked, unjustified, unlawful war that was waged by one participating state against another, with grave consequences for the whole of Europe, but particularly for the Ukrainians, who are suffering on a daily basis. This war is taking a huge toll. And then, of course, you can say, but Russia, Ukraine are part of this organization, so what have you done? And I can assure you there were so many working in support of cooperation and dialogue. Our Polish chair came to Vienna on the 8th of February to launch the renewed European security dialogue. This was really an attempt to put aside the differences, and it was an offer to launch a process to rebuild trust, transparency, cooperation, and it was overwhelmingly supported. But Russia chose force. Russia chose force over dialogue and over cooperation, or I should say President Putin chose force over dialogue and cooperation. And Russia probably violated, yesterday the UN Charter was mentioned, I think Russia violated like almost every of the 10 principles of the Helsinki Final Act. So what are we doing now? So first, we have launched the Moscow mechanism twice, because the issue of accountability is so important. And every Thursday, we sit in the Permanent Council, and the first item on the agenda is always Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. But we are not only talking, there's a lot of concrete work this organization does in support of Ukraine. Unfortunately, we had to close down the special monitoring mission because Russia could not join the consensus to extend it. But our project coordinator in Ukraine is back in Kiev. We are now prioritizing humanitarian support for Ukraine, but we're also working on so many important projects like demining. We're helping Ukraine with their chemical emergency response, cybersecurity, environmental issues. There are disastrous consequences, environmental consequences because of the war. So this work is ongoing in Ukraine. But I know that there are huge consequences beyond Ukraine, and this is why we are absolutely determined in this organization to redouble our efforts in support of the Western Balkans, Southeastern Europe, or Central Asia. I'm just coming back from Central Asia, where the impact is being felt. Now, in this part of the world, we have been present as OSCE for the past 25 years. And I've seen the value of this here in North Macedonia, because we're not only working at the national or regional level, we are really working at the local level, which really brings us closer to the communities we serve, but helps us to spot instability or tensions at the community level and engage early. We have we have a mission not only here in Skopje, we have one in Tetovo. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have 9 field offices, and in Kosovo, we have 5 regional centers that cover all the 38 municipalities. And together with our partners, the EU is on the panel in the first place, but also with the UN, we work a lot to help governments to build institutions, strengthen the rule of law, fight corruption, because resilience, and this is the title, depends very much on democratic institutions. So I think the work we do in support of protection of human rights, freedom of the media, electoral and also security sector reform is critical. And let me say that the work we do on gender equality, women's economic empowerment, also empowerment of youth as the stakeholders of tomorrow, for me is absolutely critical. That's part of the OSCE's comprehensive approach to security. And maybe a last word, because We have heard it yesterday, reconciliation is still so important. So with the OSCE, we work through an academy to bring together women from Serbia and Kosovo, or we work to ensure more inclusive quality education in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And maybe also another point, because we should not forget that one of the biggest challenges of our times is climate change, and climate change has a direct impact on security. And climate change doesn't stop at the border. So in the Shire Mountains region, which is shared by Albania, North Macedonia and Kosovo, we are supporting a regional approach to address some of the security challenges that are posed by climate change, to actually help countries to come forward with joint solutions. There's so much more I could say, but I think I probably have to stop here just to say I'm so much looking forward to North Macedonia also being our chair next year. I know you're well prepared. I work very well with your excellent team in Vienna. We'll have the opportunity to discuss it later. You will take over in very difficult times, I agree with you, but also the OSCE is more vital than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, General Secretary Helga Schmidt, also for affirming that in fact these ideas are not less important but more important now, that they are challenged frontally. And I had to think of the Charter of Paris when we heard President Putin last week explain his view with a clarity that was so unambiguous, saying that the states in the world are either what he calls sovereign states, by which he means nuclear states, and colonies. And that colonies, that means most of Europe, are destined to be controlled by sovereign states or empires, which is a frontal attack on the values on which the OSCE is built. So upholding these values seems more important than ever. The OSCE, of course, growing out of the CSC in 1975, has been around for many decades. But our next speaker represents an institution that has been around even longer, the Holy See. That is resilience. A lot of changes, and yet the Holy See is still here. As we know, it doesn't have tanks, but it does have moral authority and diplomatic experience, and so I'm very much looking forward to Archbishop Paul Gallagher and his vision as the foreign minister or secretary of the Holy See for foreign policy. How do you look at Europe?
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank, through Minister Osmani, the authorities of North Macedonia for the welcome and the organization of the conference. It's really very good to be here. I was last in Ohrid nearly 20 years ago at a meeting of the governing body of the Development Bank of the Council of Europe. And it's a pleasure to come back because the lake and the surroundings are as beautiful as ever, and as preserved, and they speak to us. And I think that we in Europe today should learn from that message of nature. I'm really happy to be here as well because some time ago, from the Vatican, we perceived that our involvement in the Western Balkans could be increased. And so we made a sort of strategic decision to come more often, to get to know things, to get to understand things, and to talk to people. And then, unfortunately, COVID struck us, and we were put back a couple of years, but we have begun coming more to the region in recent months, and I'm finding it to be very useful, and I'm hoping the people we're meeting find these encounters to be also positive, because we are concerned, and we do think that a lot of things need to be flagged up in this region, and that people in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world should be taking note. My remarks will be essentially around the OSCE, because the OSCE is also an institution in which the Holy See has invested a great deal, right from day one, from the time of the Council for Security in Europe. And we believe in OSCE. Cardinal Casaroli dedicated a very large part of his career to promoting the OSCE and to arriving at the Helsinki Final Act. And it's the only organization of which we are a full member. All the other UN agencies, etc., Council of Europe, we are observers. But our commitment to that process was indeed very strong at that time of the signing of the Act, and it remains strong, despite obviously the problems to which already reference has been made. I've been going to ministerial meetings now since I started this job 7.5 years ago. A certain degree of frustration, perhaps one could say paralysis at times, was evident. But I think our position is that possibly because we are an institution based ultimately on faith, that we need to renew our belief in this institution, because it is the world's largest and greatest organization dedicated to security. And therefore it brings together in a very unique way, and it operates in a very unique way. But I think that we need to take that. And we need to take that reality at this particular time, when the threats are very great, which we all know, which the Secretary-General has just been referring to, and the Minister as well. But we shouldn't be sort of despairing and saying the OSCE has failed because we've had this war. The OSCE is there to try and help us move forward after this war and to strengthen things. There is ever more need for dialogue, for engagement, precisely because also, as we are all aware, there is a danger of a nuclear dimension to this conflict if it were to go bigger. Without Russia, the OSCE, I think, would lose its real focus and purpose. I think if we go back to its roots, this is what it was: time of the Cold War, engagement, talking. Now, obviously, some of those acquisitions, some of those minor triumphs of the past have perhaps been compromised. But the purpose remains there. And I think that we should also note that, to the best of my knowledge, Russia has made no indication of its desire to leave, to abandon the OSCE. So there is on the horizon the possibility. We believe that also that there is a need for everybody to be engaged. Everybody, small states, major powers, soft powers, etc. And this is indeed very important indeed. We should try to bring together, shall we say, maybe everything that we have in common, everything to which we can cling to as being our common values, our common commitments, and making those things work, despite all the difficulties. If we go back, the Holy See has always remained convinced that true and lasting peace among nations cannot consist in the possession of an equal supply of armaments, but only of mutual trust. And that is one of the great characteristics of our present time, a lack of mutual trust at many levels and between many institutions. And we surely have to try and put that right. So I think we have to stay faithful to the principles of right reason, truth, justice, vigorous and sincere cooperation, and above all, not to concede to discouragement. And remember, ultimately, as Pope Francis has said in a recent statement concerning the nuclear question, true peace can only be an unarmed peace. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Archbishop Gallagher. Now, when we saw the images in the last 3 months of millions of refugees, the biggest refugee catastrophe in the history of Europe since the 1940s, millions of refugees fleeing Ukraine, I felt reminded of 1999, when, of course, this country has opened its doors, Albania has opened its doors, because we had 1 million refugees in 1999 from Kosovo. The fact that this region is no longer generating refugees, that it has been at peace for 2 decades, is great. but it's not enough. And our next three speakers, I'm sure, will tell us what needs to happen to fully realize the dream of this integrated, resilient, secure Europe, with perspectives from Kosovo, Albania, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I'm particularly happy that we now have the Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of Kosovo's government, Donika Gervala-Schwarz, because this is an exciting moment in the relations between Kosovo and the rest of Europe, with the application to the Council of Europe, and an anomaly is to be corrected, the last democracy, which is not a member of the Council of Europe, applying. Another anomaly, the visa requirements, which seem even stranger now, that we see how important it is for Ukrainians to travel visa-free, and yet the less than 2 million Kosovars still require visas. And I heard from the visit of Chancellor Scholz that Kosovo is planning to apply for EU membership as well. Where is Kosovo? What do you expect? What does Kosovo need? And what can Kosovo contribute? Please.
Thank you very much, Gerald. Bujar, I just want to congratulate you for this amazing event that you are organizing here next to our doors. And the last year was wonderful, but I'm wondering what can come more than last year. And I really congratulate you for this, bringing us all together in this format. So where is Kosovo at the moment? You mentioned 1999. You mentioned the OSCE, and we are witnesses of how OSCE can act when there's need. We have our generation can tell you always the story with the orange-colored cars, who are still a sign of hope in a country which is in war. And when these cars are leaving, then everybody knows that it's over. Now everybody needs to save himself, his family, and needs to find shelter and to find a place until the end of the war. So violating all principles that has kept us together for so long time, such a long time, means that we need to start to rethink how are we going to build this continent for the future generations, for our children's and for their children's. And where Kosovo is today is a very optimistic picture, because Kosovo has shown being a true democracy, with very respected economic development, being a good neighbor to everybody, showing that being interested in even serious negotiations with our northern neighbor, Serbia, in finding a solution that at the end can be only the mutual recognition of our two countries. The final agreement with Serbia will not only contribute our two countries, our both countries, but will contribute to the whole region and to Europe. That's why we are very serious in finding the ways and contributing in the negotiations. I'm very aware of the fact that you cannot start with the asking for the recognition, but we never should forget that the recognition is the goal. So not putting at the end, but putting at the center, as Chancellor Scholz told in Pristina last week. This is very important to have the progress in the region. So on the other side, Kosovo is still fighting with procedures and actors who are not recognizing that only the international integration, the fully complete international integration of Kosovo can bring the process, even of the process of the dialogue with Serbia further. Because we need Kosovo as a strong democracy in the European Union, being part of all the international organizations, and finally, don't forget, being part of the United Nations as well, because the mistakes that have been made to Ukraine, the mistakes that has been made in the 90s, having not a clear analysis and judgment about the fact that we were standing in front of the war. Everybody, I belong to the generation who tried in the 90s to convince international partners that we need, as region, we need help and we need concrete action, because it was visible for us in the region that the war is coming. And all the international partners trying to convince us that no, there will be no war, but just be patient, we are going to talk about human rights and their development. And the same we have seen with the mistakes made in Ukraine. You cannot appease autocrats and dictators. You simply cannot. That's not the language they understand. You can send just clear messages and have a clear strategy how you can deal with them and what you are ready and convinced to do to avoid wars and to help countries who are confronted with neighbors who are ready to wage wars to realize their own interests. So, knowing the mistakes from the past and from the latest past, I hope that the European Union will take the needed conclusions and send the messages that are needed. A chance for sending the messages is next week. We will see at the meeting of the Council in Brussels which will be the message for Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova, and which will be the message for the countries of the Western Balkans. We believe that the full integration of the countries of the Western Balkans who has shown themselves as true democracies and applying rule of law for everybody, they deserve to have a clear yes for their further integration in the European Union, merit-based. We are not asking for any favor, we are just asking for being part of the Union where we feel ourselves as being part of that. Our citizens feel themselves being part of the European idea. So those who are not part of the European idea should take this opportunity now, next week, to change their minds and to try seriously become part of the solidar community of all the democratic countries in Europe. And because this could be a missed chance and this could have grave consequences for them. So to conclude with, yes, the Western Balkan should have a clear answer next week, but at the same time, there should not be the feeling of having the, some kind of strategy if we give the clear yes to Ukraine, Georgia or Moldova, this will damage the interests of the Western Balkans. European Union is a strong community. European Union can do both. And if opening the EU accession for Ukraine is the way for helping them win this war, then you have our full support for that strategy. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for this very strong message. It has been noted by Ukrainian friends that there's been no voice from the Western Balkans to Brussels saying no to Ukrainian candidacy, and there's been many voices from the Western Balkans calling on the European Union to actually give candidacy to Ukraine. So some might have, in some capitals of Europe, thought of playing off the two groups. It didn't work. Ukrainians and Western Balkans actually have the same destination, the same goal. Archbishop Gallagher talked about the beauty of nature, and of course the lake outside is that symbol, that magic Lake Ohrid. I was here first in 1990 taking a group of tourists to Albania. At that time Albania had no private cars, and our tourist bus went into Tirana. Literally it was a city of pedestrians. So things have changed here too, as any of you who've been to Tirana, a bustling, dynamic capital, recently will know. But not just this has changed, Lake Ohrid today is a NATO lake. I just realized this yesterday, because both of its neighbors, Albania and North Macedonia, have joined NATO, which 10 years ago also would have seemed difficult to achieve. It has been achieved, so now both North Macedonia and Albania have another aspiration. And I'm very happy that Maggie Fino, representing this new generation of pro-European politicians from the region, can talk to us about Albania's aspirations for Europe, for the region, and for common security.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I would also like to take this opportunity also on behalf of the Albanian Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Ms. Gjachka, to thank Minister Osmani and the organizers for organizing this dialogue on European security, which is especially timely and important for our region. Well, I'm particularly attracted to the title, Building Resilient European Security Together, which is, I suppose, the most important point of it all. And if the Russian aggression against Ukraine has shown something, is that we're indeed stronger together. Now, it's a fact that Europe is going through the most difficult phase ever since the Second World War at this point, and trust, peace, and security are all suffering due to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The security landscape in Europe has changed. It has unfortunately brought back open military confrontation in the old continent. And regardless of how this war will end or how long it will last, the European architecture and the OSCE will not be the same. NATO will not be the same. The EU will not be the same. Together with our allies, Albania stands strongly with Ukraine at this time, as you also mentioned, and will continue to do everything in its capacity to help peace and freedom in and around Ukraine and to restore the principles of the European security architecture. I will attempt to focus my brief remarks on 3 points, and I would like to start by discussing the OSCE, which was also discussed by the colleagues here, and the European architecture. Of course, it goes without saying that we fully support the Polish chair's initiative to renew the dialogue on European security in the OSCE at the outset of this year. It is regretful that this platform was not used by Russia to ease tensions. And in Albania, we mention this intensely, precisely because during our journey towards modernization and democratization, we have experienced firsthand the positive transformational role of the OSCE. We're happy that we could give back to the organization through our chairpersonship back in 2020. And I take this opportunity also to wish success to our neighbor, North Macedonia, with their chairpersonship of the OSCE next year. It must be inherently clear that only by respecting our collective commitments, the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, the Charter of Paris, and through genuine dedication to dialogue, we can expect a more stable and secure Europe. This is what Albania is committed to contribute to as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, whose presidency we're also holding this month. And my second point refers to the fact that Russia's war brought unprecedented unity in NATO, between NATO and the EU, and among what I can define as the political West. But we cannot exclude the possibility that Russia will seek to challenge and undermine the unity of the West. Thus, we need to take concrete steps and adopt the necessary measures aimed at a long-term adaptation. Current strategic competition makes today's threats not restrained by geography or border, and a close cooperation with NATO's partners, and I would single out the EU actually as the main strategic partner of NATO, has become an absolute necessity. It is imperative that the West take back the initiative and deny space and the vacuum to rivals wherever it can, and the right place to begin would be the Western Balkans. Such unprecedented situation also calls for a creative, new approach into actively supporting the legitimate Euro-Atlantic aspirations of the countries of the region. NATO should uphold the Euro-Atlantic aspirations of the Western Balkan countries that share our values, including Kosovo. And in our view, in the current situation, it is crucial for NATO to have an institutional relationship with Kosovo. As we face growing strategic competition in cyber, maritime, and space domains, we should remain committed to the 360-degree approach, and we should ensure to not miss any strategic direction, paying the necessary attention to food security, climate change, which was also mentioned, terrorism, migration, and to emerging disruptive technologies. And thirdly, as I've already touched upon the necessity for the West to take back the initiative and deny space and vacuum to rivals, especially in the Western Balkans, where we are witnessing worrisome signs of renewed tensions. We're pleased that the EU recent strategic compass considers Western Balkans as a strategic priority due to the security and stability being not yet a given due to the increasing foreign interference. I want to underline that this strategic approach of the EU towards its enclave has always been there, actually. But what we have missed all these years are resolute steps to implement the strategic approach. Despite the momentum that fueled the final stages of the adaptation of the strategic compass, the recent war, the EU must continue the process of the political and economic unification of the continent as the best antidote to the war and destabilization, as it was decided decades ago by the Founding Fathers. Because there is no European security without our region. In making the region safe, the accession perspective must be restored. It is crucial for the EU's credibility that the Union delivers on its promises made to the Western Balkans. And this now practically means the first intergovernmental conferences for Albania and North Macedonia, visa liberalization for Kosovo, completion of Kosovo-Serbia dialogue with mutual recognition, candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina, implementation of the new methodology of accession negotiations with all that it entails, preservation of the rule of law, and keeping the EU as a strategic choice of the Western Balkans. It is also high time to see the countries of the Western Balkans rather as loyal partners and future members of the European Union than a problem to be solved. If the region remains a source of vulnerability in the eyes of the decision makers and member states, it might be, unfortunately, a self-fulfilling prophecy, and neither side is interested in that option becoming the bitter reality. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Foreign Minister Fino, Deputy Foreign Minister Fino, for this reminder. The loyalty, of course, is proven in action, and what we've seen with the new NATO members from the Western Balkans, they've never caused any problems. So the fears in the EU about, letting more members in and then there will be all these difficulties. We've had, I think it was Charles Michel yesterday or this week who said that Montenegro, which is not here, has had a 100% record of voting with the European Union on foreign and security policy, and I think it's not much different for Albania and North Macedonia. So this is proof that one can join organizations and contribute and make them stronger. Now, we've seen history move yesterday, I think, with the actually it was 4 big European countries in Kyiv giving their strong support to candidate status for Ukraine and Moldova. This is great, but it leaves a question, what about Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has applied years ago, which has been at peace for more than 2 decades, 25 years, which has had 7 consecutive national elections, which has seen changes of governments, where there is no political prisoner, which really belongs in the same group as Moldova or Ukraine. So my question now, and looking forward very much to the Deputy Prime Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Josip Brkić, is what does Bosnia expect? How do you look at things? And what can Bosnia and what can the rest of Europe do for more resilient security also in this part of the world?
Thank you very much, Gerald. Deputy Foreign Minister, still Deputy Prime Minister, maybe after the elections in October, but we'll see. Thank you for the good, outcomes, and I'm going to, transfer this message. First of all, allow me to thank Minister Osmani, to you and entire team which is standing behind you on the excellent organization of the event, and it's really my privilege to be here and to try to give a light from the side of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as you rightly pointed out, long overdue country for the candidate status of the EU, and the country, by its social, historical, religious, you name it, background, is pure 100% European country, but not the part of the political Europe of the EU. And maybe this is the answer on the question what would help to increase the resilience and security sense of my country, but I would dare to argue of the entire Southeast Europe. Let's rewind 100 years back and see what was the security structure of Europe at the time. We had a First World War. Someone is saying that it started in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but no, that was just a pure cause or spark that lights a bigger fire. Then we had a Second World War. Then we had a Cold War. Then we had, of course, war in the 90s, differently defined by the players in this conflict. And yet, in the third decade of 21st century, we have brutal military aggression of Russia to Ukraine, of one country to another, trying to stop the sovereign wish of the country to go into the future integration direction wherever it, is choosing to do so. The vital role to bridge this West-East Cold War period was, of course, based on the Helsinki Final Act and the values that were set there through the organization of the OSCE that had a prominent role also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it still does in the post-conflict country, helping to build confidence, helping to build the resilience, helping to build the also reconciliation among us in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that's why I strongly believe, as it was said before, that the OSCE is a platform that should be used, maintained in the future to overbridge what is the security challenges ahead of us, not only in Ukraine, but in the dialogue that we had from the different sides. In order to do this, we have to repower, refresh, give the new support to the OSCE, and try to avoid consensus -1, or that there is no consensus on the issues which are of the importance for the European security as such. For me, for my country, also another framework who is extending the security in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but in the region, is also the NATO. The NATO that become organization of pure military defending 12 countries, now grown to 30 member countries with the more political weight than, or equal political military weight in this sense. But the organizations which is promoting the values precisely is the ones which are attacked in Ukraine of the sovereignty, of the autonomous will of the country to choose its own future. So that's why I think that two processes would help us to be more resilient and more security safe in any aspect of the security. First one is to close the enlargement process, or to try to finish, go towards the finish line of the enlargement process for the Bosnia and Herzegovina and for the entire region of the Southeast Europe. And no, neither from Bosnia and Herzegovina, who does not have the candidacy status, maybe next week we are going to see, well, the news are going to be equally positive as for the three countries that you have mentioned. But no, you are never going to hear that we are opposing European perspective of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, because all of those countries are equally with the European setup and the values, as I explained to my country. And I also firmly believe that what would strengthen the resilience and the security overreach for Bosnia and Herzegovina and the entire Southeast Europe is to continuous open door policy of the NATO, of the alliance as such, today in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we do not have full consensus on the membership to the NATO due to the lack of the internal consent of one constitutive people, but we have full consensus on the cooperation and further integration and using the best of the programs and the abilities to work and to be part of the solution and less part of the problem when it comes to the security aspect and dimension in this part of the Europe, but also in the Europe as a whole. So Europe now, NATO now, more strongly, more courageously to try to, close this generation task which is ahead of us. And of course, it should be, as we were told for the past 2 decades that I'm dealing with the integration of my country, merit-based, and it's really past overdue for the IGC, for Albania, for North Macedonia, and every success in this region we are celebrating together. And to this extent, I think that this, at the very beginning of this Commission, stated strategic vision of this Commission is going to show concretely here in this kitchen garden of the European Union, which is the Southeast Europe. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Josip, and apologies for promoting you to an even more difficult job than the one you already have. And of course, thanks for reminding us about Bosnia's aspirations. Looking at the news this morning, I must say one does begin to feel some optimism with the letter by the Slovenian president urging strongly for Bosnia to get candidate status. Perhaps the Austrian foreign minister, very strong statement as well. Perhaps there is some momentum and we might see more good news from next week's European Council. Now everybody wants to join the EU and not every member of the EU has been so comfortable with this. Now the queue is growing and yet there is a reason for that, which is of course that this is the successful peace project that we've had. It has been the answer to the aspirations of Europeans when they started with a very small group in Western Europe in the 50s and everybody wanted to join. So when they do, then the EU has to deal with this internally, and one of the people who've been at the center of defining an approach how the EU can shape and build resilient security has been Angelina Eichhorst. Now, of course, I should promote you now also to High Representative, but it's one of the people behind everything that EU High Representatives have done in recent years to promote the European perspective and resilience and security in the Balkans. As a Director for Europe, Managing Director for Europe in the European External Action Service, what does all of this mean for the European External Action Service, for the EU, and what do you foresee should happen next?
Thank you so much, Gerald. Really very pleased to be with you on the panel. And let me first thank the Foreign Minister Bujar for bringing us here. We have all a lot of emotions around Prespa, and I want to share the emotions since I happened to be here when the signature took place, not here in Prespa exactly, but for this extremely important agreement. And we will always carry that with us, these moments in history and time when everything has been transformed for the good. And I'm glad you had also a little optimistic note now, Gerald, which I just want to share with you as well. You have seen it, it's coming in. The recommendation by Commission President von der Leyen just now on, as expected for those who work in the institutions, a very, very strong recommendation of candidate status for Ukraine and Moldova, Georgia. There are elements around it, I should put it like that, but it is an extremely important and strong signal from the European Commission today to the world. But in fact, what it means, this goes to the member states, and then the 27 member states will decide on this next steps next week. So next week came up already a few times in this conversation. I would definitely want to go further into Western Balkans also. We have a later panel after lunch where we can go more into the points of Western Balkans. But what is important here is indeed that very, very strong signal we are giving about our community, our family, our building our family, our being together. Many words were used, and I'm the last one to use enlargement because I think this is about consolidation. This is about, the Prime Minister of Serbia said, encompassment, about integration, about deeper and stronger. And this is in our interest, it's in everybody's interest, but now it's historic, it's more important than ever. When we talk about the resilience part here, of course, and I think you mentioned extremely correctly, if we zoom out on the big picture of leaders who today believe that they are the big powers who are entitled to their own spheres of influence, as you were saying, so breaking down entirely the United Nations Charter, Helsinki Act, everything we have been working on. This is dramatic. I don't want to do too much drama here, but this goes to the core of our values, our being, on who we are and what we have built all these years. So you usually talk about resilience when you have a lot of risk factors. I think this is the perfect storm of all risk factors coming together, politically, economically, security-wise. And that's why the first call and the first act is to mobilize all ourselves, all of us, to stand up and to defend, continue to defend what we believe in. We do that internally in the EU, but then I also mean all of us here on this panel, and we have to do this globally. There's a lot of narrative out there that this is only about the EU fighting Russia. This is absolutely wrong, and we have to continue to explain what is happening at this point in time. And if we don't have this narrative, somebody else does it for us, and we can see that there's a lot of misconception out there we need to work on together. And I'm very grateful that we can do this together. Now, elements were mentioned here which are of crucial importance, but sometimes it escapes people's minds. Montenegro should have been on the panel, I agree with you. 100% aligning with decisions, with sanctions of the European Union. You said it, you almost gave it as a given, Gerald, but in fact for North Macedonia this is very recent, and it's thanks to the current government who actually pushed it through, because this is quite courageous to do. It's even courageous for all our other partners around, let's say, just outside the circle of the 27. If we look at Switzerland, if we look at Norway, Iceland, we take for granted. They are in the EEA. But still, it is quite a courageous step to take, to vote with us, to be there, to go on multilaterally and to defend the Charter. I particularly talk about the Charter of the United Nations, because there's so much about rules-based order and what we do here. But this is really where we are together with the OSCE. I want to thank the Secretary General, Helga Schmidt. She knows us very well, but we also know her extremely well. But in her organization and all the efforts to, you know what this is? Keeping everybody together. Because that is what the essence is. This is not about kicking out, but keeping together and trying to find solutions. Because at one point in time, and we know that in history, we will need to sit at the table again and work these things out. What we have done, I have a long list of what the European Union has done since 21st of February. I'm not going to bother you with it, but just keep in mind on each and every angle, whether it is on the energy part, the food part, it came up many times yesterday and today, but also the strategic compass. And thank you, Minister, for mentioning it, because we took the Balkans right in on the strategic compass, because this is our guide for our defense and security framework for, well, it was written for the next 10 years, but today we don't want to talk about 10 years. We say for the next 2 to 3 years because time goes so quickly. But there's a huge energy, strong development within the institutions being mobilized to build up exactly this resilience. And it's not just about the European Union. This is about the global capacity, I should say, because it is a capacity issue as well, and the willingness to continue to defend what we have been standing for at least since the Second World War. So what does it mean in the end for the European Union? It's many elements coming together about the issue of new candidates, but it's also how do we work better internally, more efficient. You have seen all the debates about the conference of the future of Europe. I was here last year to actually promote the conference on the future of Europe with a lot of a new generation of young ambassadors of the EU. I also said at that time, let's just act as if we are all members of the same union, and let's do as if things are out there, because that is the positive way of working, which we still need. But it is also more about how can we create, okay, the French call it the political community. It is a good term, I think, because we need to have a political space for all allies and friends to be together around the table. But this is not just a talk shop meant to be. This is about the cooperative arrangements we can have together to actually work closer to each other. And that, and then I will finish, is still different, and I want to really underline it, it's different from the enlargement process, which will stay intact. It has to stay intact, but it has to be accelerated and it has to be re-energized, which we are all pretty much hard working on 24/7 all these days. And we heard many ideas here on different panels, but they are, believe me, this is very much on the agenda in the institutions for all the reasons we know. So I want to stop here. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Angelina, and also for reminding us again that what is at stake in Europe today is really this clash of two very different principles. One, this view that you refer to that says that big powers can control small and, well, Ukraine is not small, smaller powers, that there are spheres of influence. And the other, that any country, however big it is, any democracy, any sovereign state can come together with others on the basis of equality, and that borders are not threatened and smaller countries are not pushed around, bullied, or conquered. Now that is a great vision, but we should remind us this was an innovative vision that was created in Europe after the Second World War. Before that we had a lot of empires in Europe as well. And one country that knows that very well is Malta, which of course has a full voice. It's one of the 27 that will be sitting there next week, will decide what the EU should do as an equal full member. But that is small. But it's not just that Malta is small, Malta is also in one respect a model and inspiration. I recently looked up how long it took countries to complete their negotiations with the EU. You know, when everybody says, I heard it recently, a famous French president, well, the current one, said it might take decades to get Ukraine in. Well, I looked at how long it took Malta to start and complete its EU accession talks, and it wasn't just Malta. Slovakia was as fast, Lithuania was as fast, Latvia was as fast. It took them 34 months to complete the whole accession negotiations. And that's a reminder that if there is the will on both sides, when we talk about accession, it doesn't have to mean decades, it doesn't have to mean 10 years, it can be done in a few years. So Malta will be there then as a result of the successful accession. And I'm very happy that we have the permanent secretary of the Foreign Ministry of Malta. And now I hope I pronounce your name right. I was practicing. Christopher Katahar. Is that okay? Please correct me if I got it wrong. From Malta, about the perspective of a member state on this debate.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Actually, my surname is Kutayar. But thank you for trying.
You have to talk to Google Translate, because that's what I turned to this morning. I said, Maltese name, they need to change that.
So basically, I would like to thank the Foreign Ministry of North Macedonia for giving us this opportunity during this second edition of the Prespa Forum Dialogue. I think that this dialogue has got its own three dimensions. The first dimension is North Macedonia's aspirations to become part of the European Union. The second dimension is to put forward this agenda from this particular region. And I must say, which is also a vocation which is close to Malta's heart, that it also is in line with the Mediterranean vocation, meaning that we need to take care of the centrality of the issues being faced by the Mediterranean. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to listen to what the President of Kosovo had to say, and I couldn't agree more when she said that in the Mediterranean, we've got security voids that we need to address. And in fact, if we had to look at our recent past, be it the Arab Spring, be it the conflict in Syria, be it the conflict in Libya, or else, be it the question of the Western Balkans to come out and to re-establish itself after the fall of the former Yugoslavic Republic, I think that it is important to get the Mediterranean as being a central part of our own agenda. We are ending up having the Mediterranean at the periphery of everything, at the periphery of the European Union, at the periphery of Africa, and at the periphery also of the agenda of certain multilateral organizations. So, chapeau to the Foreign Ministry of North Macedonia for organizing for the second time round this particular forum. I must say that we believe that we should opt for a peaceful and prosperous and secure region in our region. And in fact, what I augur is that we continue to find the energy, the courage to engage in dialogue. I must say that in certain multilateral fora, some of the states are more keen to say and to pronounce what is the message from their capital rather than listening to what others have to say. And I think that, yes, the infrastructure is there, but I think that we should utilize in a better manner the multilateral organizations that we form part of to be more innovative, to be more creative as to how to find new solutions to the current impasses that we are facing. As we well know, from time to time, we will always have our own crisis in the world. And we are doing well to focus on the crisis brought over by the invasion in Ukraine. Malta, notwithstanding that Malta is not a NATO member, and also given that Malta has got its own neutrality enshrined within its own constitution, we were unanimous in our vote within the European Union to vote for the sanctions packages that have been approved so far. We have condemned the invasion in Ukraine for the simple reason that it goes against the UN Charter, be it territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. So, though we are neutral, that does not mean that we are indifferent towards what's going around in this world. However, we should continue to press on to have a cohesive Mediterranean region. Because after all, we are as strong as our weakest links. So it is good to continue to push forward for a political process to prevail in order for the aspirations of the states within the Western Balkans to be achieved. And that is what Malta also does, given that in its own foreign policy strategy, it does explicitly say that we are in full support towards the Western Balkan countries who would like to achieve that milestone in their particular history. And I must observe that some of the times we fall victims of the rhetoric that the European Union is not working that much to have this process finished off. You mentioned that the accession period for Malta lasted only 34 months, but we also had our own roller coaster ride, because since the time that we have originally applied, that was in 1991, and we managed to be part of the enlargement in 2004. So the complete ride was 13 years, but the accession period, given that we were prepared with our own legal frameworks and we were prepared how to negotiate to adhere to the acquis, we managed to then speedily go through that process. But I must say that I think that it should be more the willingness of particular member states within the European Union to facilitate the process of adhesion within the European Union of these states within the Western Balkans to facilitate. And as we say, it has to take two to tango. So it has to be also from the part of those states who are showing willingness to form part of the EU to keep on cultivating and pushing forward with their political agenda to take care of each and every chapter that will guide them to be forming part of the European Union. And I am saying this because, after all, we do not afford to have disparities between what the political class in a state would desire and the public opinion. And obviously, the public opinion can easily be manipulated by disinformation. But however, in order to be able to align all this, we need that the member states within the European Union, the political classes within the states within the Western Balkans, and the public opinion to be aligned towards this particular process. I must say that notwithstanding all the hardship brought over by the conflict in Ukraine, there is one single positive aspect that I am observing. The realization within the European Union that we are bound to strengthen our interdependencies. Because after all, the food crisis and the energy crisis has brought us to think how to be more interdependent in the larger world. So we are thinking more as to how to be more present in the Gulf states, for example, as to how to achieve more interconnectedness with India. I think that more should be done when it comes to agreements such as the EU-Mercosur and EU-Mexico in order to unleash the potential of trade. But then, going back to the idea of the centrality of the Mediterranean as is being augured through this dialogue, I must say that we should even try harder for the interconnectedness within the Mediterranean to be strengthened. And it's good to see that von der Leyen was in Israel to forge that pact also trilaterally with Egypt. It's good to see that there is more importance being given even through the strategic compass for the Western Balkans. And I think that our ability to keep this process going on as a political process is not to alienate the people. And in order not to alienate the people, we need to create more opportunities to our youth within the Mediterranean. We need to get also what Secretary General Helga Schmidt has already augured, to get a sort of project-based approach towards phenomena that we are facing, such as when it comes to climate change, whereby, for example, the cooperation amongst civil protection departments now should be more than ever in order to counter fires that usually there are outbreaks even in this particular season of the year. And most of all, if we are to think about a peaceful and secure future, we need to think more about a prosperous future. So that means that we should not neglect North Africa, because in North Africa, people are being displaced. There are many people being displaced, and we need to address and tackle problems at source by being able to bridge out to the southern part of the Mediterranean much more, but most of all, given that we are here at the Prespa Forum Dialogue, I stand to bring my wholehearted commitment towards the Western Balkan states, and we need to get the right spirit for the Western Balkans in the coming weeks, hopefully, to get a new leap forward in this process towards integration within the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for this strong message of support also from the Maltese government. It does make me think whether there is not one more thing that the European Council could achieve next week, which would be to state something that the European Council stated in 2001, where it said if countries meet all the conditions, the EU would be ready to admit them in 2004. Now, we know Montenegro has been negotiating for 10 years. There's no Montenegrin here. But if Montenegro negotiates another 34 months, like the whole negotiation of Malta, and then it takes 16 months to ratify an accession treaty, Montenegro could be a member of the EU in 2025. And it would be good if some EU member states would say that it is possible for those that are ready and 100% aligned with EU foreign policy and create no fears, that those could actually join. Because that is the experience that we've had before, and it has worked. Now, I say this because there is no Montenegrin here, but I want to thank the panel for being even more disciplined than the previous one. I think we've beaten them. We started half an hour later, and we still have 5 minutes to finish this half an hour with delay. I would just ask our host, if Foreign Minister Osmani, if you, having heard all of this, my sense is that there is some sense and cause for some optimism for the next weeks. What is your final message from this panel?
First of all, I'd like to thank all, once again, the panelists for the fruitful discussions and frank discussions that we have just heard. Just to say to our Maltese colleague that North Macedonia, as an incoming chair in office of the OSCE, in 2023, this year, chairs the OSCE Mediterranean Group, and I understand that the perception is that the OSCE Mediterranean Group bond has been dormant, if I can say. Lately, we have decided to reignite it during our chairmanship, and I have decided to go on a tour to the Mediterranean partners to invite all of them for a conference between OSCE and Mediterranean Group in October in Jordan, hoping that this will bring an added value to our relations, but also in general to the OSCE work. Regarding the EU agenda, certainly that this meeting or the next Council, 23rd of June this year, will be an important one. Will be a critical juncture to determine the future or the direction of the process. A journalist asked me a few days ago how we will resolve this issue with Bulgaria on joint celebration of the monuments of different historic personalities, whether there is a solution for that or no. And I said, Bulgaria is on a good way to become a graveyard for the best policy of the European Union in the last 75 years, and that is the enlargement policy. And then we will open a debate whether we will go to this monument together or on our own. And therefore I'm saying that these are critical days. This Council will be a critical one that will decide on the future of EU enlargement for the region in general. North Macedonia's case has become a litmus test for the credibility of the process, and it will be on this case that the future of the process will be determined. We are still hopeful, and we are going to continue to engage ourselves to find a solution and a way forward in order not only to pave the way for North Macedonia to move in the process, but rather to send the messages to other countries in the region that this process is alive and one day will be there. Thank you once again for your good work today, and to everyone participating in the panel.
Well, thank you, Foreign Minister Osmani. And we do actually have one more message from somebody who's not here, but who sent a message, Mircea Geoana, the Deputy Secretary General of NATO. So that will be our parting speaker at this panel. And then afterwards, we just have a photo. So please stay here. I was told by the organizers for the photo ceremony to be taking place here. But let's listen to Mircea Geoana from NATO, which has been evoked a lot. And then I thank you for your attention.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends and colleagues. It is my honor to address you today alongside such distinguished speakers. Foreign Minister Osmani, thank you for hosting this second edition of the Prespa Forum Dialogue. Unfortunately, I cannot join you in Ohrid. But we are preparing for a transformational summit in Madrid in under 2 weeks from now, which will also address one of the topics of this forum: how to ensure our resilience in a more contested world. Ohrid and Prespa gave their name to two historic agreements, the former preventing another brutal civil war, the latter ending decades of disagreement between neighbors, but both with a shared vision and determination to settle long-standing differences by peaceful means, and to choose the path of security, democracy, and prosperity for all. I was honored to play my part in Ohrid as OSCE Chairman in Office in 2001, with former NATO Secretary General Lord Robertson and EU High Representative Javier Solana. And I was even more honored as Deputy Secretary General of NATO this time to welcome North Macedonia into our family of free nations in 2020. Because this was good for your security, good for the Western Balkans stability, and good for Euro-Atlantic security too. Today, North Macedonia contributes to our security in many ways, including in our peacekeeping mission in Kosovo, through increased defense spending, and by supporting our partner, Ukraine. And North Macedonia can count on NATO too. You are now part of NATO's air policing system, where Greek fighter jets help to keep your skies safe. And NATO remains strongly committed to stability of this strategically important region, through our KFOR mission and our offices in Sarajevo and Belgrade. This is NATO's solidarity in action, standing together to protect and defend each other. And this is more important than ever in today's difficult world. President Putin's war on Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe, has shaken international order, and sparked a global food and energy crisis. NATO allies have responded with strength and unity, providing significant support to help Ukraine uphold its right to self-defense, reinforcing our collective defense to prevent the conflict escalating, and applying massive and coordinated sanctions with our partners to pressure President Putin to stop his brutal war on Ukraine. However, this will end. We know that Putin's ambitions go far beyond Ukraine. He wants to rip up the global security order and return to spheres of influence, and deny nations' right to define their own destiny. China has backed Russia's calls to end NATO enlargement, openly contesting core principles for our security. So we must prepare for a world where authoritarian regimes use any means to test our resilience and challenge our democratic values and our way of life. From disinformation to diplomatic pressure, to economic influence and military threats. This is what you are discussing today, and what we'll address at our upcoming Madrid summit at the end of this month, where we'll strengthen NATO as the cornerstone of our collective defense and broaden our approach to security to reflect challenges, old and new, from Russia's renewed aggression and the ongoing threat of terrorism, to cyber and hybrid threats, climate change, disruptive technologies, and China's coercive policies. Resilience is central, and this is what NATO does at its best. Because strong societies and economies are our first line of defense, ensuring that our supply chains are secure, that our critical services do function, and that we bounce back better from stress, shock, and surprise. Maintaining our individual and collective resilience is grounded in NATO's founding treaty. It will be a key part of the new strategic concept we'll adopt in Madrid for our future security. Allies have already agreed to develop national resilience goals and implementation plans based on clear and measurable objectives. And I was delighted to chair the first meeting of NATO's new Resilience Committee last month. Resilience is a team sport, civilian and military. Allies and partners, including our close strategic partnership with the European Union. And what I call the triple helix, people, public, and private sector together. And this is where I see cautious hope in the current crisis, in the private companies that are stepping up, and the young people and private citizens helping so generously Ukraine, who are opening their homes and offering humanitarian support to the people of Ukraine. This is a galvanizing moment for our societies and for our democracy. This is really resilience in action. And this is indeed the spirit of Ohrid and Prespa. And this is how we will stay strong, secure, and resilient in this more dangerous and competitive world. So thank you again for your leadership and inspiration, and I wish you a very successful discussion.
So this brings to an end our panel. I want to thank very much all the panelists. That's been not just interesting and informative, but also inspiring and I think energizing, that there is a lot of potential for positive things, for things to go right as well as wrong. As we've seen in the last months, things can go right. And there is this spirit of Ohrid, there is this spirit of Prespa, and we want to thank our host, the Foreign Minister, for bringing us here together to feel it. Now is lunch. We have to take a picture, and you all are welcome back to the next session in the afternoon. Thank you.